Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of TBR. I'm George Binns, and the guest this evening is the noted man about town, Stuart JL Gardner, attorney at law. Welcome, Stu.
Hey, George.
And we got a title up there that says we want to talk about the Ukraine, Russia, and the United States and how we get involved in some of these things. And I guess you're concerned about some of the media and the characters that feed the media with some strange stories, somewhat creative stories, I guess you would say.
I can't handle it, George, anymore. Sometimes I back away from the news and I stop reading it and I stop watching TV because it's so challenging because you hear just outlandish accusations. I think the country, and I think it's exacerbated in the Ukraine, we're kind of like in this spiral of accusations and lies that we can't get out of. And as I was telling you before when we were discussing it seems to me like, I'm not putting you on the spot, but Republican and Democrats are either pedophiles, satanic worshipers, or witches. There's no positive ideas on the Democratic side. It's all ad hominem attacks, and it's done with the Ukraine as well. I think you've got a lot of. I shouldn't say a lot. You've got vocal Republican support for the war in Ukraine for Putin. You got Tucker Carlson saying, why am I not supporting Putin? They got oil. Like, why the Ukraine's bad? And I think about it. And if I was on Tucker Carlson's show, I would say, if you were in Russia, Tucker, you couldn't have this show. Because if you did not support the government 24/7, they'd put you in jail for 10 years. Yeah. People say things like authoritarian regime, and it doesn't mean anything to them because they live in the United States. They don't realize that means if you say something or your kids say something, you go to jail. And it's not a nice jail where they feed you 3 meals a day. It's a gulag, in the middle of Siberia or something. You have no rights. You have no right to own a gun. What Republican would support Vladimir Putin when they realize there is no Second Amendment rights in Russia?
Well, I think part of the problem that you're struggling with is when you say support Putin, I think there's some people that are trying to analyze, how did we get into this mess? Where did it come from? And you go back into some of the geopolitics of Russia. It's been a treadmill for people coming and crossing that area for years. It starts with the Huns and the Mongols, and it just keeps going on and on.
Sure.
And then going in the other direction, it was Napoleon and Hitler. And it's the old joke about just because they're paranoid doesn't mean somebody isn't out to get them.
Yeah.
And as a result, you can understand a concern with developing some sort of protection. And as far as they're concerned, protection is lots of countries between us and them, lots of distance. They don't give a about the countries that are in between that get beat up as they wear out the army attacking them like Napoleon or Hitler, but it protects Moscow eventually. And it's a very selfish point of view, but that's the way they are. And I think too many of these arguments boil down to, as you say, an ad hominem attack because somebody's trying to explain why they think it's happening, and it turns out, oh, you're supporting them. And I've gotten this on several occasions with different discussions, and I think that is part of the problem, that people are looking for an argument rather than not looking for understanding.
I also don't understand, and we pay all these tax dollars, and the government has all these think tanks. Don't they? We predicted weeks before the Russian army invaded Ukraine. We said they were going to go in there, right? But the big thing was what you had just said. Putin's afraid that Zelensky's going to join NATO, and then he's got a NATO alliance. He's got the Western world on his edge. So if it's 4 weeks before the war, why don't we say, okay, Ukraine's not going to join for at least 10 years. But Russia can't interfere with Ukrainian politics. They're an independent country. You can compete. Russia's got oil. Russia's got other resources that they want to sell. What I don't understand is if we did know what was going to happen, why did we just sit around and wait for them to invade? What makes no sense to me is all this brain power that we have is not going towards anything.
Well, we weren't prepared to do much about it. And I think this is one of the downsides as far as Putin is concerned, is he just woke up NATO. They were dormant.
Right.
Trump, for all his machinations, at least he was beating up on NATO to say, you guys committed to putting a certain percent of your GDP into defense, and you haven't been doing it for years. And they're depending upon us to come over there and bail them on any time there's a dust-up. And we just don't have the wherewithal to react that quick. You think about the free-for-all in Kuwait. It took 6 months to get an army together and get it over into Saudi Arabia so that we could kick the Iranians out of Kuwait. And it's not like, you guys in Airborne 101, you just go over there right now and take care of them. It don't happen that quick.
It was Iraq.
Iraq, you're right, yeah. But at the same time, it still took 6 months, and we did a good job. But it's not something you can do right away. So the initiative was Putin's.
So what should we do next in Ukraine? I can't, we're sitting here watching the war, and everyone's like, there's all the discussion, is it because they're a European country and they're basically white, or is it because a lot of them speak English, or whatever it is? I don't care. I mean, what do we have? What do we have a world for and the 911 system if we're not going to help others in emergencies?
Yeah.
And all we're going to do is keep feeding the Ukrainian soldiers? What else are we going to do?
Well, at this stage of the game, that's about all we can do, because Russia is in the Ukraine. They just started another attack a couple of days ago on the eastern side, and it looks like Putin is saying that, well, I can't take the whole country. I'll take their eastern border.
Yeah.
So he's going to get from Sevastopol or the Crimea, which they took in 2014 or 2000, something like that, and just work his way up that eastern border of the Ukraine and get himself a little buffer.
Yeah.
But that seems to be his consolation prize, as best he can do right now. But he's already got Belarus, and Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia are starting to get very nervous, as is Sweden and Finland.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Latvia, Estonia, they're not NATO members, or are they? Latvia is. I know Norway and Sweden aren't, but I think Latvia, Estonia, and the Baltics, those Baltic countries, I think they're NATO members.
Yeah. So, from Putin's point of view, or the Russian point of view, is NATO's been creeping up on their border, and they thought they had a buffer when they had a very friendly government in Belarus, which they still do, and they had a very friendly government in the Ukraine. And then along comes somebody and upsets the apple cart, and now the government, well, before the free-for-all, the government was more in terms of thinking better about becoming a NATO country. Yeah. So you can understand what's going on.
Sure.
And I don't think that people understand that the guy is paranoid. The country is paranoid. And just feeding their paranoia.
Well, I'd like to kind of segue to that about their influence of their paranoia on our country. Yeah. Because, again, I was telling you this before while we were discussing, I'm overwhelmed with, I can't handle as I said, I shut the TV off for a while.
Yeah.
And I turn it back on, and it's Marjorie Taylor Greene calling, people that support the new justice, pro-pedophile because she gave sentence guideline prison sentences to people that were convicted or something. what bothers me, George, is not some crazy person that yells a name at somebody. It's the lack of reaction by the public, by the party, that doesn't ostracize these people. And I put the blame. I know Donald Trump's not in control, but I put the blame on him because he kind of opened the door and said, "This activity, this type of work is okay. We're gonna tacitly approve it." By not saying anything, by not coming out and saying, I remember when Obama was called a Muslim during some presidential election, and John, the senator that died, the war hero.
Oh, John McCain.
John McCain said, he's not a Muslim. Not that it matters, but he's a good man. But these rumors start, and they're impossible to stop. And what bothers me is there's no consensus of the party going, this is bad activity. We don't support it. You can't support Putin. You can't support anything. And there's just it festers. And as I was saying in the beginning, we are in a spiral, I think.
Well, you're perfectly accurate in that. If you look at the data from 20, 30, 40 years ago, there were some people on the left, some people on the right, but most of the people were in the middle.
Yep.
And being in the middle, some were slightly left of center, some were slightly right of center. And they could talk to each other and they could compromise. Compromise is now a dirty word.
Yeah.
And what has happened over the years is the majority has either slid left or slid right, and there's nobody in the middle. And I keep using this line because I like it, is that John Hightower said, "You don't find anything in the middle of the road but a yellow stripe and a dead armadillo." Mm. And really what he's saying is that anybody in the middle of the road trying to compromise gets beat up from both sides.
Yeah.
So there is no incentive to try to work anything out. You got to find your tribe and work with your tribe.
Being in the middle, but isn't that how we get stuff done?
Exactly.
We're in the middle. We work with the left. We work with the right. We create legislation that everyone's sort of unhappy but happy with. But that's nothing's happening.
Well, that's the fundamental of the negotiations. If you walk away from a negotiation a little unhappy, but you walk away with a deal, it's a successful negotiation.
100%, I agree.
Yeah, and this has gotten to the point of we got to have 100% of this or 100% of that. And therefore, there is no way to reach a compromise because people just don't want to say, this is what I've got to have. This would be nice to have. And, oh, yeah, that's a little frosting on the cake. You want the frosting on the cake and everything else.
I wrote down this word twice on my pad here, constructive, because I want to be constructive. And as I told you, I just don't want this to be a bitch session. So I'll tell you what I do, because people come up to me and talk to me about this stuff all the time. But I personally try to at least, ameliorate, correct ridiculous assertions. I've got good friends that think Obama's still in charge. Yeah. They're like, why is Obama still in charge?
He's pulling the strings on Joe Biden.
I don't understand. I'm another guy, and I'm down in Florida a lot. Now, Florida's got, obviously, it's a very hardcore, it's 50-50, but people have strong opinions there. And they'll come up to me and say things like, oh, New York's a crime pit, and New York City's terrible, and, the Democrats run it, it's horrible. I'm in New York City 4 weeks ago, it's gorgeous. People are having fun, there's people outside, and I'm like, you see these, and I look at them, and I stop spreading these, rumors if you don't know. You watch it on Fox News, or you watch it on One American Network, or you see something, it's a narrative that's not real. And as I was telling you before, we're going to go to war not because we disagree with each other, but because of these narratives that are created by politicians or television that everyone believes.
Well, you get back to your discussion about New York. Okay, depends on where you are in New York.
That's true too.
It depends on where you are in Chicago, or pick any other big city. You end up in the wrong neighborhood, you're liable to be a victim.
Yes, I agree with that.
So what it bothers me is people take truths that are very narrow and blow them up to say, well, this is representative of the whole picture. And it isn't true. And it's part of the problem of you got to look at all the details and find out what is really the average result. And what you're saying is, Yeah, you can be in places in New York and things are really gorgeous. But at the same time, there's areas you just don't want to go into.
How do we fix it, George? What do we do? I mean, you and I are just two guys talking on a TV show.
Yeah, I know.
But it's almost like, when you watch a movie and you've seen the movie or type of movie 100 times, you got all the scenes and you know the conclusion. And I don't like to be doom and gloom, but all I see is us, spiraling into a worse scenario. And I was just saying, either at the midterms or the next election, because we can't agree on up is up and down is down.
Yeah, I know.
So what do we do? Other than sit here and bitch and moan on a TV show.
Well, that's part of the thing, too, is that somebody's got to make these statements that, hey, the situation is getting out of hand. We're running out of control. And I got a particular bug about global warming and all that free-for-all. As far as I'm concerned, it's a hoax. And I look at it from a technical point of view, and that's my business. That's the way I was trained. That's where I got my degrees. And I look at some of the statements people are making, and they're totally false. They're technically wrong. And yet, oh yeah, we could just keep spreading that around. And I get the same frustration that you get on that point. And you try to make a position with somebody, you try to talk to the city council, talk to the local politicians, and you're right, it's in one ear and out the other, and it doesn't fit the party line. And I think that's where the trouble is that there is too much of this go along to get along kind of thing. And I
think it's a win at all costs mentality.
Yeah.
And I think, again, Mr. Trump brought that in, and, he was big. There are different ways to achieve success, right? You can achieve success by being brilliant. You're a Elon Musk or you're a Tesla or whatever, and you've got this great mind for doing things. You can be a great businessman, or you can be I'll say ruthless, but win at all costs type of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that mentality has invaded every bit of our politics.
Yeah. Well, that essentially describes Trump. He was in the business of building things in the difficult cities.
Yeah.
And he had a continual battle with zoning
boards, yeah.
And
win at all costs.
So that contractors and everything else. So it was a continuous battle. And that's the mentality he brought to it. And he appealed to a bunch of people who looked at the Democratic Party and said, no, wait a minute, you used to be the party of the working man, the blue-collar worker, party of Al Smith days and kind of thing. And all of a sudden, now all you're listening to is the liberal college educated.
The elites.
You don't represent me anymore. Who's representing me? And they're looking around and there's nobody. And Trump comes out of the woodwork and says, hey, I'm your man.
Yeah, you were talking about the book by Fiona Hill that you were reading.
Yeah.
That compared Trump and Putin and about their populist message was very,
and
very
this
similar.
whole idea of being a populist, you appealing to the really downtrodden people that are not being recognized. Look what's what happened to the coal mining industry. Look what's happened to the auto manufacturing. Yeah, it's a problem that the unions got to be a little too powerful, and the net result was the companies weren't competitive. But at the same time, you can look at the auto industry and say, hey, wait a minute, you were building these gas guzzlers, and all of a sudden, in 1970-something or other, I forget the exact year, Saudi Arabia cut off our oil.
77?
Could be 77, yeah.
Yeah,
And the next thing you know, this big muscle car was the last thing you wanted.
Yeah.
And Toyota and a few of these other Japanese companies were making small economical cars, like the Volkswagen. And Detroit couldn't turn around quick enough, and they lost a significant market share. And as a result, you look at Detroit today, and I always like this meme that shows up on YouTube. There's a picture of Hiroshima today. Gorgeous city, all built up and everything. And here's a picture of Detroit, and the caption underneath is, Who won that war?
Won the war.
Yeah. So you see where these problems are happening and people are not solving them. And net result is there is a whole group of people in this country that feel that the government ain't for me. And somebody like a Trump can come along and say, hey, I'm going to do something for you.
It's interesting that you said that because I just finished this book about Jimmy Carter and his great malaise speech, I'm sure you remember, was the downfall of his presidency. But I think he was trying to be candid. I read this book, and there was a lot of notes of his saying that the country was in a great malaise, and because of the gas problems, because of overseas, and because we have sort of lost our, he was saying we sort of lost our way in the world, and I think we have as well.
Yeah.
I got. Let me just say, I know we're running on in. I got no problem with the United States being a shining beacon, right? Like, I think we dance around what's going on in the world. What the world needs, and you don't laugh at me about this, is constitutional rights for everybody. Yeah. If our Constitution's so great, and I think it is, the first 10 amendments and the way the system's run, everyone in the world should have constitutional rights. You should have the right to assemble, the right to redress your grievances against your leaders, all that kind of stuff. That's what we should be exporting. If we're fighting a war with China, if we're fighting a war of ideas with China and Russia, our example can't be Donald Trump or even Joe Biden. It's got to be what makes the United States a better country, or what can make the United States a better country.
Yeah, and at the same time, we're in a situation right now where there's lots of different opinions on how to run a country. And it's not just China and Russia, it's the whole Middle East. They are geared into Sharia law.
Yeah.
And
well, they've also got monarchies too, so.
Yeah. And you think about how long it took to get from monarchies and theocracies to what we have in the United States right now. And one of the ones that I was surprised by is you think about the number of dynasties and kingdoms and groups that had lots of money by hook or by crook, but mostly by crook. And
mostly.
Well, they go out and raid.
And mostly, but as to your answer, mostly the big change was early 1200s, the Magna Carta, which gave the dukes, the underlords, all these rights, which then sort of translated down, took 1,000 years, but sort of translated down to the individuals.
Well, this is the thing it comes down to. It happened in Northern Europe. Germany, France, Belgium, England. What's different about their attitude? Was it Martin Luther and his attack on the theocracy of the Catholic Church? Was it Gutenberg and his Bible? And you think about it, Gutenberg got credit for movable type. The Chinese had this years ago, way before him, and it didn't have that effect. So what is this magic that happened in Northern Europe and got around to the United States that the rest of the country
hasn't hit the Middle East yet?
Yeah. Well, it hasn't hit the Middle East. It hasn't hit India. Yeah. It hasn't hit China or Korea or anything. But the Japanese seem to be picking up on it. The South Koreans seem to be picking up on it. Australia and Canada to some extent.
Yeah, Northern Europe. Yeah, you
yeah.
That.
So this magic sauce, if you want to call it that has gotten us that far, doesn't seem to be transferable. That was Bush's problem, George W. Trying to save the world for democracy.
Yeah,
and that can go back to Wilson even. He was going to save the world for democracy
but
too.
He was League of Nations that he started.
Yeah, that was his vehicle. Yeah,
it lasted a year. Didn't last long. I want to do a show with you on global warming because I'll argue about global warming.
Okay,
but that's for another day.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's a couple of days. Yeah. But so I think this is the problem that what we've got is awful difficult to export, and I don't know how we get over that.
I'll just tell you this: if it really is a war of ideas and a war for the hearts and minds of the young people, I think we're losing.
Yeah,
I think we're not. We are. All they see is infighting. All they see is a lot of ridiculous coming out of the United States. I don't know. I still think it's interesting. I was out last night and there was a was with some friends at a bar, and there was a guy sitting alone, so we invited him to sit with us. He was from South Africa.
Oh.
And so I asked him, why the States? And he says, it's still the land of opportunity.
Yeah.
He says, you can't do it in South Africa. You can't do it in most other places. Most other places I can't get. You got a 3-year visa. He says, other places I won't be able to get a 3-year visa. And he says, I can make money, and I can have a nice house, and it's still the land of opportunity.
Yeah.
So we still have that draw. I mean, it's anecdotal, but,
Yeah. Well, I've seen data that says the best paid workers in the United States are Asian males.
I believe that.
And basically what it is Chinese that are coming over here and staying, the Indians that are coming over here and staying.
Yeah, well, it's the STEM. They're really good at science and technology. And
well, and that's the other part of the game that STEM is not pushed hard enough. How many kids come out of school with a degree that's totally useless?
We also fight over little things, stupid things, like these books that were taken out in Florida, the critical race theory. There's also all these things. It was like problems that mentioned black people's names. It wasn't something that talked about critical race theory. We concentrate and argue about the wrong things. And I think, what we were saying before, I think it's intentional. I think the leaders of this country, I think and I don't know who they are, politicians, big companies. I think it's intentional to keep us sort of argue with each other so we can't get positive change.
Yeah. And you talk about critical race theory, well, that's as phony as a $3 bill.
Yeah.
Because biologically, there is no such thing as race. It's a social construct, which is a polite way of saying it's a fabrication, which is still a polite way of saying it's a lie.
Yeah.
But yet it's really in the system. Everybody talks about. I've read a couple of these books by black authors about white fragility and that stuff. And in the first chapter, they admit that there is no such thing as race, and it's a social construct. Then they spend the rest of the book talking about race. Wait a minute. You just said it doesn't exist, and now you're talking about it.
Well, perception is reality, so sometimes people perceive it to be real, so it's real. You might be right for the scientific definition, but there's a lot of arguments on both sides.
I'll send you the link to the 4 shows we did on the journey of man.
I'd like to see it.
Yeah, and we had Jack Quigley on, and he's an anthropologist from Salem State, and it really starts with the Sand people in the Kalahari region of Africa, and they just spread out from the rest of the world. We're all related to each other.
All related to the same people, I agree.
Anyway, we've had about a half an hour of fun, and I've enjoyed it. I hope you have too. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. And again, as usual, at the end of the credits is my email address. If you have a comment you would like to make about the show, pro or con, I'd like to hear from you. And if you want to have a voice at the table, we'll make room for you. Thanks again for watching, and see you next time.